like being on this end, Othaniel.
How are you? I don't want to take it away from Dave. Thank you.
I got some questions coming for you, so.
You what?
I got questions coming for you.
Okay. Oh, great.
Okay. I'll move. You gonna search the land underneath there?
Try this and see if it works. See if that powers.
Not much.
Yeah.
How about you?
I know, he's here for one
Was
night.
it?
I saw that.
Yeah, he was
He's
hilarious.
here. Oh, you saw him? I saw it, that he was here for one
Oh,
night,
yeah.
and I thought,
Yeah, I think he had 3 shows or something like that.
Oh, well, where at?
At 30 show? At the Buell.
oh, he was here
That
one
sounds
night.
fun.
Yeah, I've seen him at LOL, we can pull
He
up.
cracked me up at the White House correspondent. Trump had just taken office.
Oh, okay.
They made him, like, promise not to.
Sure.
Trump joke. Hi, you're over there.
Whoa,
I know.
shuffle. Hi there.
Hi, how are you? Good.
Then he launched.
Yeah.
Hey, how are you?
And then
By the time you tell me, yeah. Thank you.
You want me to throw more on?
No, just get back to you on Thursday.
It's okay.
No big deal.
Phones are intimidating. Hello.
We are streaming.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Great.
I couldn't hear anybody was more I just couldn't say that.
Yeah, that's what you said.
Yep, you, that looks of that.
Hey, everybody's here.
Imagine people like speaking into the mic.
Okay,
Lunches
like
away.
me too.
Yeah, like everyone. So, we're all lunching. So, for everyone, speak up, but a couple lunches away. Hopefully we'll have any issues.
Thank you. All right, it's 6 p.m. and we have all city council members present tonight. This is the city council study session for Tuesday, February 19th, and ready to begin. Our first item up tonight is redistricting, and city clerk Stephanie Carlisle is here to help explain this and answer questions.
Yep. All right, so per city charter, we are required to redistrict every 4 years. So this is our year. It's based on a couple different things. One is the number of current registered voters, and they can't vary between the lowest and highest district by more than 15%. And total population may not vary between the lowest and highest district by more than 5% per state statute. So John Vorberl, our senior planner, put together, so every 4 years he takes a look at it and puts together some options. We take that to the election commission to have them review and study it, and then they would make a recommendation that we would then bring to you for your consideration. So John Vorberl, senior planner, had put together 2 different options. So basically with some of the growth that's happening in District 2, there needed to be some variance, and option one would allow for slightly more, a boundary change that would affect more of District 1, and option 2 is a boundary change that would affect District 3. So as we presented this to the Election Commission, they made a recommendation, but they also wanted you to review both options. And then I'm certainly here to answer any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you. Council members, I'm sure you have questions. Councilmember Bernstein.
I am a little concerned because John Vovero with the city staff.
Could you talk into the mic?
Oh,
Thank
sure.
you.
See, I forgot already, Sam. Bad.
It's easy to with these.
With somebody from community development putting the two maps together, and even though our charter has the city clerk on that board, I would suggest in the future that we have the chairman of the board or some other members of that board come and present as well for their recommendation, so it doesn't look like it's just being something that the city's doing. I mean, we do have a citizens appointed to this board, and I would like to make sure that that's reflected in this conversation when it's presented to council as well. I don't have a problem with either one of them. I listened to the meeting, talked to some people. I'm fine with either one, but I want to make sure that the citizens understand that this isn't something that is bypassing citizen involvement.
Councilmember Sierra.
It's more of a clarification than a question, but within 117, both splits on both maps are shown in green. My assumption is the left-hand side of the splits for both pages would be brown. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. And that is tricky. I know what you're saying about on option 2. And again, you know, the Election Commission studied both of these options, and they were the ones that made the recommendation. I am just bringing it forward. But they really felt like, you know, the option 1 and the way that they came to that decision is because it was cleaner, just a cleaner break. But there wasn't a strong, strong pushback on either side, so.
So actually, no, my comment is, I guess on the east side of Broadway within 117, that green slash, that speck should actually be brown because the break is at Sherman, and I believe on the second map, it's on Logan.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sierra, do you have any particular perspective on either one of them? Councilmember Barentine really didn't care either way.
No, nothing that out of the ordinary. I'm fine with the split the way it was constructed by the city clerk and staff, so no issues.
No preference to the 1 or 2?
Oh, no, I don't think I had a preference. I'm fine with either or.
Okay, Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. I prefer option number 1 only because the distribution of the registered voters seems more equal in each of the districts. Since we're going to have, excuse me, split precincts in both, I prefer option 1.
Thank you. Any others? All right. I thought, go ahead, Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, that's probably a good way to look at it. The more even we can spread out the voters, that's probably for the best. And it seems like they get much closer on that first option as opposed to the second. I would lean that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, do you have any preference one way or the other?
It really doesn't matter to me, but it looks like the lines are cleaner also in option 1 because District 3 takes another block on the west side of Broadway. I just think it's just a lot cleaner the way it is here.
That's what I think too. So it sounds like option 1's your way to go. Thank you.
We'll
Get
bring
back
that
to us and
forward.
thanks for all the work. Thank the committee for all those that helped with this. Appreciate it. Our second item is a 2020 budget preview. Staff is here to share the review presentation with us, and actually, is it you yourself doing this?
Yeah, it is me.
So Director Sabat is here to go through this wonderful set of slides. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I will wait till they are up on the overhead.
You have to go right up to it.
Testing.
There you go.
It is a little uncomfortable. Okay, so while Sam is pulling up the PowerPoint, thank you, Mayor and City Council. You know, when I started, it was right in the middle of the budget season,
And we talked about starting off the budget season with an overview of the budget process and the timeline, and also just a summary of our sources and uses of funds, not only for the information sharing with the council, but also with the citizens and also my staff, and also the department and the city itself, because a lot of these things seem complicated, but they're truly not. And I hope that this presentation helps to achieve a better understanding of the budget process. Although it's informational primarily, I will have a question towards the end, regarding the process and how you want to move forward and whether or not this seems like a reasonable way to step forward. So this is a pre-kickoff, so to speak, of the 2020 budget. So the objective tonight is to discuss with council the budget process goals, like I had stated, to review the proposed budget calendar, to provide an overview of funds, and to update council on the budget priorities process. So our goals for the 2020 budget season. Truly, I think one of the main themes that I heard towards the end of the budget cycle last year was that council would have liked to have had information shared throughout the budgeting process. And I think some of the proposals that we'll put forth tonight that you might make a decision on will help with that information sharing. We will continue to work toward greater transparency. We will review the budget priorities with council regularly throughout the process. We also hope to foster discussion regarding the community goals and also make information easily accessible to the public, and of course continue to engage the public, and that will also be one of my questions towards the end. How do we go about doing that through the budgeting process?
Councilmember Questa, do you have a question, or is that just left on? I just realized it. Well, I didn't even notice it till now. Thank you.
Okay. So we will start with the 2020 budget calendar. I actually have two calendars in the presentation. One is specific to what's happening internally within the finance department and also the city, because obviously we engage a lot of the departments as we build the budget. So this is department specific, or city specific, I should say. Right now in Q1, we are closing out the prior year financial activity. In fact, I'm scheduled to come back next week and review the 2018 pre-close numbers with you. We are also in the process of developing the revenue forecast for next year's budget. We will develop budget guidelines based on the revenue and expense forecast assumptions presented to City Council. And by March, the capital budgets will begin to be established by each of the departments. Moving into the second quarter, the departments will prepare their operating proposed budget requests with finance's support. The departments will finalize the capital and operating proposed budgets for the city manager's review, and will review with City Council towards the end of the second quarter the capital and operation budget requests. Moving into Q3, in July, the city manager reviews the proposed budget. I will present the proposed budget to City Council. Hopefully it'll be me. We will print the proposed budget. We will have a budget public hearing, and we will finalize the budget around the end of Q3 in September, as we did this year. In Q4, the timing is the same as it was for 2018. We'll have the first and second readings of the budget ordinance to adopt the budget ordinances. We will provide the mill levy to the county. We'll again print the final budget. We will also prepare a draft plan for next year's budget cycle, which it's hard to believe it'd be 2021's budget. Seems surreal. So that is a full look at our cycle of what we do internally and how we work towards preparing the plan. The next calendar actually talks about the council's engagement throughout the same process. So we are tonight here to present a budget preview, and we plan to come back March 25th, and we'll present revenue and expenditure forecasts and underlying assumptions. That's our official kickoff of the plan. We will ask for City Council's input on capital projects. Our estimated timeline for that is April 22nd. And we will also ask for City Council's input on the following proposed operations requests, including any additional FTEs, new or changes to existing programs, new or changes to fees or rates. And we have a proposed date of June 24th on this calendar, and that is going to be one of my questions, so I'll ask you to think about it a little bit as I'm going through the presentation. I know in the past there has been a workshop where the City Council and staff members meet to talk about their operational budgets, and we spoke with the directors when we reviewed this presentation with them last week, and they all agreed that we should bring that proposal forth to the council to think about. This would be a workshop that would be held perhaps on a weekend day, so that the directors themselves can come in and talk about their respective budgets with the council and address any questions you may have, and that would be in a public setting as well. So think about that. We have the date up there as June 24th. That is not a set date. It's around that time period that we would ask that you consider that. In the third quarter, we would be working very diligently to present a proposed budget to City Council by the beginning of August. The proposed budget would become available on September 6th, and we would have a budget public hearing on September 16th. We would have a budget workshop to finalize the changes September 23rd on that date or somewhere near there. Again, working, what did I just hit, Sam? Oh, there we go. We're good. Fat finger. We would be working on the first reading of the budget ordinance October 7th with the second reading on October 21st. So that is the full proposed calendar with City Council's involvement throughout the process. Okay. So I'd like to move forward into kind of an overview of the budget itself, including an understanding from where the money comes from, understanding how the money is spent, and understanding the city's financial plan or the budget. And you know, I want to say that this is a rather simplistic presentation of the budget, but you know, we've shown it to a couple of audiences that don't typically have their hands on the budget to see whether or not the level of detail provided was adequate and understandable, and we got some head nods, which was very good. We include some numbers, but we don't include them all because we thought it would be best to show relative size of proportion of certain spending and certain sources of funds relative to the overall budget. Okay? Okay. So funds. You know, basically you can think about funds as how a city accounts for the financial activity of its various programs and services. And if you think about it, you know, in terms of how we run our households, a fund is like a checking account. And those checking accounts have a balance, or you think that you want to maintain a minimum balance to cover all your bills, and that's the fund balance reserve that we referred to throughout the budgeting process. The fund balance is the checkbook balance. Deposits in a checking account are like our prior year-end fund balance because we carry forward those funds in each of the funds that they are respective to. We add the current year revenues or the sources of funds that could be fees, etc., or the types of sources that I'm going to be walking through tonight. Those are considered deposits to funds. Withdrawals are expenditures, or we also say uses of funds. And as I mentioned, the checkbook balance is your fund balance, and your minimum checkbook balance is your fund balance reserve. Okay. So I'm going to step into where the funds for the City of Englewood come from. And I use the 2019 budget, all fund sources by fund type, in this presentation. So in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that there is a greater than a quarter of the fund within the general fund coming from prior year-end fund balances for all funds. And for 2019, that was close to $52 million, just over. The general fund is approximately $49.6 million of all of our funds. There's a special revenue fund of approximately $1.2 million. Debt service fund of $3.3 million. capital project funds of close to 7.5 million, enterprise funds of 31 million, and internal service funds of 11.1 million. I'm going to actually break down where the sources and uses of funds come from for each of these components. Okay? Starting first with the general fund. Okay. So the general fund, again, this portion is comprised of general fund prior year balance. So it's our ending fund balances that are in excess of the reserve requirements. So this is the piece of the general fund budget that I just showed on the previous slide. A portion of that is our balance that is excess of reserves. Oops, I clicked too many buttons. The largest portion of it is sales and use tax, and that is the 3.5% of taxes that are applied, and it accounts for approximately 58% of total revenues collected, and sales and use taxes generate approximately 79% of all taxes. And it is one of our most important, but also our most volatile source of revenue. We also have charges for services. This includes general government, public safety, fees for the administration of the utilities funds, court costs, highway and street and other charges. Franchise fees. The city collects a number of taxes on various utilities. These include franchise taxes on water, sewer, and public services, as well as occupational taxes on telephone services. Property taxes. So that is a relatively small portion of the big pie of our general fund. And I think we all know what property taxes are. The majority of us pay them, right? That's the portion of recreation program fees. This category obviously is the fees and charges collected from customers to participate in the various programs offered by the Parks and Recreation Department. We also have funds from licenses and permits, and this includes the business licenses and permits, to be more specific. We have the EMRF, net rental proceeds. This represents the net rental proceeds from the Englewood McClellan Reservoir Foundation. All other sources, this is specific ownership. These taxes are based on the age and type of motor vehicles, wheeled trailers, and semi-trailers. There's also cigarette taxes included in that, and also investment income and other income that does not fall into any of the other categories that we just talked about. So those are the major sources of all the revenues, all the sources of funds within the general fund, and you can see the relative proportion of each relative to the big pie. Do the same with uses. So the uses of funds for the 2019 budget. The city managers, and again, that we're only talking about specific portions of those of the specific budget. City manager's office, the fire services contract, finance, information technology, community development, public works, the police department, Parks, Recreation, and Library, debt service, and this is the actual certificates of participation or the COP bonds and capital lease payments. So I just wanted to point out this is just a portion of the overall city's debt that we have. Okay. The transfers out, this is the $3.1 million transfer out to the capital projects fund for the identified projects, the decision that was made by council during the budget process. And then all other uses, and those are identified in the lower left-hand box, such as legislation, city attorney's office, the courts, human resources, communications, and contingencies. So those are the portions of uses that comprise the total general fund budget. I thought this would be an interesting slide. This actually breaks down what you just saw in expenditure categories. And we'll start with personnel. So more than half of our budget is spent on personnel costs, which makes sense because we are a services-run organization. So the police department expenses are included in there. So of course, personnel would be the biggest chunk of the uses. Commodities. We have contracts. In addition to the fire services contracts, so this is all other contracts outside of the fire services contracts, such as our professional services, capital, debt service, and transfers out. Okay. I showed this one other way so that you could see. I wanted to break out the personnel piece because I thought this was important. So personnel, you can see the direct services piece, and you can see the administrative services costs. Like that would our finance department would be in administrative services. The police department would be included in direct services. So I specifically wanted to show that. So I also wanted to show the general fund and capital projects funds. The piece that you just saw for capital, the general fund piece, is that small sliver. We also have capital expenditures in other areas, the Public Improvement Fund, the Capital Projects Fund, and the Police Headquarter Construction Fund. So I wanted to make sure that I showed you that in total, because we don't just spend capital out of the general fund, we also spend it out of these other funds as well. Likewise, the debt service expenditure fund. So the general fund only has the COP bonds that I was just talking about. We have more debt as a city. So we have the piece that's in the general fund, but we also have the recreation go bonds, and we have the police headquarter go bonds. So in order to see a total picture, you can see how big the general fund debt is compared to our overall debt as a city. So now we're talking about the first pie that I showed at the beginning. We've talked about the general fund. This is the special revenue funds piece. Relatively small piece, but it is comprised of the Conservation Trust Fund, and the primary source for this is the Colorado State Lottery, and also the carry forward balance from the previous year that's in the fund balance. The primary uses are the parks and recreation projects. We also have a donors fund within the special revenues fund. As it sounds, it's comprised primarily of library donation, parks and rec donations, police forfeiture funds, and also it's comprised of its beginning fund balance. And its uses include the library, some of it goes to finance, the police, and parks and rec. The Parks and Rec Trust Fund is also part of the Special Revenues Fund, and its sources primarily are the interest income. So if you'll recall, I mentioned that the fund balances do collect interest annually, and I think I mentioned in one of the council requests that the way the interest on those balances is put back into the funds, it takes we take the last 2 months balance, average balance, and take what we've earned and actually apply that interest income to each of the funds respectively. And so that's the sliver that you'll see there. So it's the carry forward balance plus interest income, and its uses, of course, are the parks and recreational projects. The Malley Trust Center Fund is also part of the Special Revenues Fund. The source is primarily contributions and also, again, the interest income on our investments and the carry forward fund. And the use is primarily the Malley Center Rec Center projects. Wow, for a small slice of the pie, there are a lot of funds. There's an open space fund within the Special Revenue Fund, and the primary source, again, the fund balance carry forward interest income, but also the Arapahoe County Open Space Tax Share, and it is used to fund projects for our parks. Okay, the next sliver is the Debt Service Fund. We talked about the fact that the city is obligated in some manner for the payment of principal and interest on general obligation bonds. So it's the debt service fund is combined general obligation, the GO or the GO bond funds in the budget. And you can see the primary source for this is property tax and the prior year balance. And the use is the principal and interest, and there's a small piece of it. There are administrative fees that we need to pay as well to Arapahoe County. So there's a small sliver of use for that. And moving along with the capital project funds, 7.5. So these are funds for construction of major capital facilities other than those financed by the proprietary funds, as I've discussed previously. Comprised of the Public Improvement Fund, or the PIF as we call it. The sources include the prior year fund balance, vehicle use tax, building use tax, Arapahoe County Road and Bridge, and a sliver of interest income. And it's used for capital expenditures or transfers out to the general fund through the budgeting process as directed by council. Okay. Capital Projects Fund, the Capital Projects Fund. Again, a portion of it is transfers in, the prior year balance and interest income, and it is entirely used for capital projects. Okay. Also within the capital projects funds, we have the Police Headquarter Construction Fund budget, and primarily moving forward with the balance that we had after we secured the bonds, and we have interest income. And we are using it for the police headquarter building, and a portion of it is being used for equipment and other improvements. And that was something we had a lot of discussion about in the early fall. So we used part of the bond proceeds to pay for some of the equipment and other improvements in the building. Okay. The next piece, a bigger piece, the enterprise funds. So these funds are used to operate in a manner similar to a private business, and the costs are recovered primarily through user fees and charges. And I included this piece regarding the Colorado Constitution because there's been a lot of discussion over the past several months regarding what constitutes an enterprise. And in order to maintain an enterprise status, what does that mean? It's a government-owned business authorized to issue its own revenue bonds that receives under 10% of annual revenue in grants from all other Colorado state and local government combined. And I thought this was a good chart. In fact, we included, I think, an extra PowerPoint or attachment that had this a little bit scaled up. So this is the process that the Office of Legislative Legal Services goes through to determine whether or not something is constituted as an enterprise. Just given the time, I don't want to go through each one specifically, but I think it's important to note that there are certain steps that we need to go through in order to determine whether or not there is an enterprise. And I think what's important from this slide is whether or not the entity, it's the last item, does the entity receive less than 10% of its annual revenue in grants, which is what I had just spoken about. That is the important piece. And the fact that an enterprise can issue its own revenue bonds is also very important when considering status. Okay, so I want to talk about the certain types of enterprise funds that we have. We have the water fund and the revenue source for that. And I'm not going to mention the carry forward fund because I've said that every slide. I think what's important to note is that the fees, the service fees and the water charges go into this particular enterprise fund. And you can see the portion of the funds that are spent for operating the enterprise, the capital outlay, and the debt service. We also have the sewer fund, and the source, primary source, is the sewer utility charges for services fees. And you can see the proportion of funds spent for operating, capital, and debt. We also have the storm drainage fund, and approximately half of the sources are the drainage utility charges for services fee. And you can see again the proportion of operating, capital, and debt service. We also have the golf course fund that is an enterprise. And as you might expect, the primary source is the golf course charges for services fees, and the proportion of operating expense, capital, and debt service. We also have the concrete utility fund. The concrete utility charges for services fees are the primary source, or half of the source, and the carry forward balance is the rest. And you can see the primary uses are the capital outlay and operating expense. We also have a housing rehab fund, and one of the primary sources of revenue is the housing rehabilitation related income, and the primary use is all operating expense. And we have one more fund to discuss, and it's the internal services fund. So these are financing of goods and services for internal services that the city provides. And the 5 internal services funds include the Central Services Fund, the Service Center Fund, the Capital Equipment Replacement Fund, or the SERF that we refer to it quite often, the Risk Management Fund, and the Employee Benefit Funds. So those, when we're talking about those throughout the budgeting process, those are our 5 internal services funds. And we just show this as a combined operating revenue and interest income are the sources, and the uses are operating expense and capital outlay. So that's an overview of the budget. And when you look at it, I think, in pies like that, in relativity, when we come back and we show you actual numbers for these budgets, I think it'll be clearer. I really do, because you'll understand the proportion and where the sources and uses and funds are coming to. I think a lot of people think visually, a lot of people think in numbers, like I do, in lists, but I think this, and hopefully you can give me your feedback whether or not this resonates. Certainly happy to come back at any time and talk about each of these and relative size of numbers as well, because they are all the same picture pies. So I do have a little bit more to cover, but I'm happy to answer any questions relative to the sources and uses of funds right now, if you'd like.
Councilmember Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks very much, Director Sabota, for the different layout and the different expression of the fund details. This was very clear for me and helpful. Recognizing the parameters of space on a slide, I thought perhaps one small detail that I was thinking through as I went slide to slide, and as you discussed each pie chart as a derivative of the original, is if on slide 12, the where does the funding come from slide with the overview of all of it, I found myself wanting to still glance back. Every time I looked through this, I wanted to sort of have a quick view of that while I was examining the details of the slices. Again, it seems like a logistic nightmare more than likely for you and your team, given the space and given how well it's laid out here. But I thought that might have been helpful for me. Maybe I'm the only one, but as we looked through the pieces, I thought it would have been nice to have that reference piece
Of the overall pie,
at the same time.
like in the corner or something like that.
Something
Okay,
like that.
Thank you for the feedback. Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Anyone else have questions or comments about the slides we just saw? Seeing none, go on.
Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about the update of the budget priorities process. I think we had a lot of discussion regarding priority-based budgeting throughout the process. And, as a result of those conversations, I talked with the directors specifically about taking a step back and redefining what that process looked like versus trying to use a tool that we're still becoming familiar with and presenting information to council. So as we're starting to build the operating budgets and the capital plans, one of the things that I'm going to do when I work with the directors is try to listen for themes regarding priorities in each of the areas, and then get together as a group and talk about how those priorities fit into overall goals that the city has. But at the same time, I think we need to work as a city and with the council and with the division directors and of course with Dorothy and the new city manager on what really are our community goals. I think last year I heard, that there were 8 goals, and then I heard there were 6 goals, and I don't know that we have a clear definition of what those goals are. So that's one of the questions, when I get to the end of the presentation, would like to kind of understand from the council, what direction we should take as we go through this process over the next several months in coming back to you and talking about those goals. But I thought first what I would talk about, when we were talking about the priority-based budgeting, regardless of the tool of whatever we're using, I think of it in terms of this. We have all of the department budgets, and, I talked about what pieces they were as part of the uses of funds. And they actually are put through an internal budgeting process, and we allocate the line item budgets to the programs. That's truly what we were trying to do last year when we came back and we had the list of programs, and those programs were included in the budget book as well. And ultimately, all of those programs should total your department budgets, and they should support the community goals. So I think we lovingly referred to the slide as the sausage-making machine in the middle. But truly it's not. If we have clearly defined community goals and we know what our priorities are, the department budgets should be aligned to support what those are every year. And they ultimately should support a strategic plan too. And so this is another way to look at it. There is a relationship, as I just said, in my opinion, and I'm sure I'll hear your feedback, regarding the relationship between community goals and line item budgets and programs. It begins with the capital operational program planning departmental budgets, and we'll be working on those over the next several months, as I have mentioned. And we'll work with the department directors to prepare their line item budgets. And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about how we would allocate those line items to programs. And that was the process that we really tried to go through last year. I don't know that we got to it 100%, but I believe that we can get closer with every year and more familiarity with our budgets and with direction from council, regarding what programs they believe are our key priorities to support the strategic plan and community goals. So that's really it to me in a nutshell. As we're going through this process, it's an iterative process where there are discussions regarding the line item budgets and how they fit in to our strategic plan and community goals. And by the time we get to the October timeframe, when you're approving the budget, we would hope that with community involvement and with the city council's involvement and with the director's involvement, we would come to an agreement and we would be at a really good place in October to approve the budget. So during this 2020 budget project, we really, as I mentioned, would like to revisit the community goals and have clear definitions, review our budget priorities process, and then identify city programs to support strategy and goals. And I guess, we put the yes and no button because we wanted to see if City Council was in agreement with kind of what the staff is thinking about moving forward with. I guess I can stop there and ask that question because I only have a couple more slides that I want to discuss, and I have just one more question. So I'll stop right there and maybe open it up for discussion a bit.
All right, Council, the 3 statements are there, and I guess those are the 3 statements you want us to weigh in on, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you for putting all this together. I think it's really helpful to look at in this way. And I've also shared it with the boards and commissions I'm a liaison to that want a little more information, high level on the budget and where if they wanted to make recommendations or have input, where they would fit in. So I think this is perfect and helpful. I think revisiting the community goals is going to be really important for us. I think we should do that every year anyway. And I like the process as it has been outlined, and I think it makes a lot of sense to identify the programs to meet our said goals. So I think we should definitely revisit the goals.
Councilmember Questa.
Thank you, Mayor. I would agree. It seems that if the goals, the community goals, in the clear definition of those goals is going to be our driver, everything else will follow that. That should really be our first priority. And I am going to go back up to the calendar you included, Director Sabota, just to see when, I believe the next time you were going to come visit us was March 25th? Does that sound correct?
It is.
So I guess it would be between now and March 25th, we would need to review and get those definitions. That seems like that could be a significant conversation as well. And I don't want to overstate that. Maybe it's not.
No, I think you're right.
That's the thing that comes to mind for me is we'd have to get after that pretty quickly. Thank you.
So, Director Sabata, is that a process that you would lead us through that night, or you would have us be doing that before we get here on the 25th? And what would the process be?
I'd like to ask if perhaps that might be a workshop possibility, because we would have an extended amount of time, perhaps to share, with the directors present, that discussion. I don't know if that might be. I know that we talked about doing that in the June timeframe, and I'm not certain that that's too late, because at that time you're looking at the line item budgets and you're thinking about the departments and what they're working on. And I would also like to ask, what would be our starting point? I don't know what our starting point would be to actually starting to develop the community goals. So, and would it be 2 workshops? I don't know. So that's another thought.
Do you have another?
I do. I should turn it over, though. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Barentine.
On the March 25th, if we end up doing oh, sorry, thanks again. After I said I was good at it. On the March 25th, if you're going to have that meeting or do a possible workshop, would it be, I think would be most beneficial if we went ahead and reviewed what the problems were with the last budget, and they were significant. We had significant involvement and comments coming from the community on issues that were a matter of addition, having the segments come in, the line items come in, and actually add up to what the department budget was. They didn't. There were some significant problems with not only saying that there was a familiarity or not with priority-based budgeting, although we're going into our 5th year with that, but with the RAD tool as well. Or the ResourceX, whatever we were using at the time, that there was a problem with that. And I know Jenny I went to a meeting with her and she showed me, we identified that there were some pretty significant variances going on there, and then the budget doesn't add up. So if we could have some kind of breakdown of all of the information we gave at the end of that budgeting process, plus what the citizens were bringing forward, so that we could start with fixing what we have already identified was the concerns from that, and as part of that workshop, that would be helpful. I appreciate I wrote down that the directors need to be part of this. I mean, way earlier on, you had kind of focus group kind of feel to it, that where they didn't have buy-in to necessarily that department or the expertise or knowledge. So I think bringing the department heads in sooner would be good. But I'd really like to start the next conversation with a review of what the significant issues were with the last budget and how we intend to fix it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. So in terms of point number 1 on this slide, bullet number 1, in terms of revisiting community goals and clear definitions, are we intending to extrapolate the result of this bullet from the council-defined themes and goals for the year? So I say this in reference to our having a retreat in May of 2018, from which we defined 5 goals / themes that were overarching and guiding our work for the year. They were very closely linked to what existed prior to that May 2018 retreat, are we looking at that to develop community goals as being different from those? I use those to guide my work on council, but are we looking to develop a completely different set of goals? I say this because I'm cautious about developing several sets of goals slash themes slash directives and not knowing where we're going because we have so many goals. So what are we talking about here?
Our interim city manager may want to address this.
I hope I don't overstep Sabata, but my understanding is that council goals and community goals are one and the same.
Uh-huh.
That is the clarity that I think we're looking for. Revisiting the goals that were established last May would be one way to go about it. I would also caution that making March 25th, when we come back, it's for revenue projections. It would, the sooner we all agree, the better, but I don't think that's a hard deadline. I think these will be longer conversations. How we proceed to get there throughout the budget process is a larger question, but I didn't want you to think that we can't proceed if we don't have answers within a month. Right. Thank you. I agree.
Thank you very much, Director Hargrove. Or Manager Hargrove. That's helpful. And understanding we've had a lot of change in the last year and maybe socialization of what the results of that May meeting didn't happen as it would have under a circumstance where our city manager didn't depart. I just want to make sure we're aligned and not straying from the work we did. We did a lot of good work that day. I think there is printed matter to reflect those goals and work. And so I just wondered, as we look at this bullet point 1, are we creating something or can we reference something that we developed? So, thank you.
My initial, just off the top of my head, response is that we have done that every year, revisited what we did in the past, and then also set new ones for the future. I think maybe that's what Councilmember Martinez means too in reviewing the past. I think it would be a good exercise for us and decide if they're still valid and relevant to what we're doing. Councilmember Martinez, I don't want to cut you off, so go ahead. Chime in.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think that is the place that I was thinking that we should start, is the goals that we established during that retreat last year. I think that's a natural place to start, and if we need to adjust, then we adjust.
Perfect. Yeah. I think this is a great way to start. I like that we're starting even a bit earlier. I do think we're going to need a workshop a little bit earlier than what we did last year that gets into more specifics, and I don't mind at all starting with some of the things that what went well, what went wrong, what do the goals make sense still, what doesn't. We have one new member totally, and now we have a couple people that have been on for at least a year and have some sense of how this works, so I think we're going to have some different ways of maybe looking at things too. So any other comments from anyone else? Can we let her proceed with this?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to mention, I think I've covered where we're going from here. I think all of the feedback is very helpful in setting direction with the team. So we'll talk about the suggestions you've made and propose some dates to have those discussions.
Great.
Okay.
I did want to make sure, last year we did quite a number of community outreach, and that's what you're still planning with this last bullet here, or continue to engage the public, right?
Yes, that was a question that I wanted to ask. How did you want to go about doing that? I don't know that we need to address that tonight, but it certainly is something that I would like to address during the workshop so that we do engage the public throughout the budgeting process.
I think that's smart. Let's put it to another time. Let's keep thinking. Everyone think about what you think are the best ways to engage people. We've tried a number of different ways, so some more successful than others.
Yep. And that is it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And your slides are way more fun when they're in real life than on.
I knew they would be.
I love all the animation.
Thank you.
All right, our third item here is the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee. Our interim city manager, Dorothy Hargrove, is here to present on this. Staff recommends that the members of the council review the current enabling legislation for CEAC and provide feedback regarding staff suggested changes and any additional changes.
Thank you. I will actually defer to the city attorney, who has a little more detail on some of the underlying issues.
Councilmember Cuesta.
I'm showing we're at 9 minutes.
I know we are.
Is it worth beginning?
Well,
A question for the group.
So I've thought if we could start perhaps for 5 minutes on this, or we could just delay it until when we get in there. We need to cover it tonight. with
This is
timing.
actually a very short presentation tonight. The longer conversation is coming up at a future workshop
Yeah.
or study session. So we're not asking for feedback this evening. We needed to get this on the agenda immediately so we could get feedback from you. So what I did was I went through the enabling legislation for code enforcement, and you can look at the handout I provided. At the top of every page, I put a current section of the code. For example, the first page is 2-10-1, which states the purpose. And then within a notes section, I reviewed some of the issues with that particular section of the code. And then underneath that, I did a red line showing you how staff would like to see that language changed, or suggestion. And we did that, or I had a little bit of input, but a lot of this is just my overview of this, of the enabling legislation. You'll notice that there are several sections where we don't present changes. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be changes there, it's just staff is not recommending any changes on those. So what we would like for you all to do is pull these sections out, review them, look at our proposed changes, and then we're really interested in knowing what your thoughts are. It might be helpful as you're going through this if you would send your individual thoughts directly to the interim city manager. And as we put together the next report, we can just incorporate that into the next report. And that way we've built in some additional suggestions from city council. So everybody could look at what everyone else is thinking of the next time this hits the council agenda. So that's all we're asking for tonight, is for you each to begin to consider and conceptualize any of these issues.
Councilmember Barentine.
After sitting on the Liquor Licensing Authority, I became aware of the history that happens for why we had a Liquor Licensing Authority, because at one point in history, the council did that. And the reason they didn't is because they got sued. So they had a citizen board. And the reason we don't have one now is because marijuana came in. And so there's changes and historical changes. And this advisory committee, the way that it's set up and the language that was used, I would like to have a little bit of historical background for why it was set up and why it was set up with the language that it was set up with, because it looks as if it was set up to try and provide a bit of a buffer. It wasn't to provide, it was specifically to provide a buffer between the community and the council when it came to ordinances and the enforcement of those ordinances for code enforcement. So if we could include a little bit of that history, and maybe we'll have a little bit better understanding. Those who don't know history are deemed to repeat it, so I don't want to do that. So if we could have that, I'd appreciate it.
Councilmember Cuesta. All right, so it's really just a directive for us to do some homework on this, be thinking about it, and interim city manager and Mayor Pro Tem, I don't think we have this on our study session for looking at it, so we're going to have to do some work to make sure we get the next. That's got to happen pretty quick, but I was looking at it when we left today and thought, we don't have this on here, so.
It'll probably be 2 weeks.
Okay, great. Councilmember Cuesta.
It is brief. Now, I know that we've had some attendance from some of the folks on this committee. Has everybody been informed? Did they receive an email? Did all members of this committee receive some sort of notification? I would hate for somebody to show up at the building. Now, again, I think that there's been pretty good participation from those folks on the board showing up here, but did we have some sort of notification process for these folks?
I did not. I can do it at this point. I mean, I'm sure they're aware, and the chair is aware, but I think that's a very good suggestion, and we'll follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Let's see. We don't do council members' choice in here, but we will do city manager. Attorney, can we wait till the next All right, great. We will adjourn and meet in the regular session in just a few minutes. Thank you, everybody.